Okay, so we're not just talking about another rock band here. We're talking about the White Stripes, who were really more of a conceptual art project that just happened to sell millions and millions of records. And they did it all by following a super strict set of rules. It's this amazing story about how sometimes having fewer choices can unlock some seriously incredible creativity. So you gotta ask, right? How did just two people with only three colors and two instruments end up becoming one of the most important bands of the entire century? I mean, the sound they made was just colossal, and their impact was global. How does that even happen? Well, the answer, and this is the cool part, lies in a set of really strict rules they made up for themselves, on purpose. To really get what made the White Stripes so revolutionary, we've got to rewind a bit. Think about the music scene in the late 90s. Everything was getting super polished, right? It was all digitally perfect, super slick, tons of layers, and honestly, a lot of it was kind of sterile. Thanks to software like Pro Tools. And then, out of nowhere, from the industrial heart of Detroit, you get this raw, primal scream, a total rejection of all that perfection. So the story goes, the band was officially born on Bastille Day in 1997. A bartender, Meg White, just kind of sits down at her friend Jack Gillis's drum kit and just starts playing. No lessons, no plan. And Jack said her style, which was super simple but really powerful, was liberating. A month later, they're playing their first show. They just dove headfirst into that raw, gritty Detroit underground scene. And even their name was all about this simplicity thing. They weren't going for something scary or trying to sound super cool. Nope. The White Stripes? That came from Meg's favorite candy as a kid, those red and white peppermints. It's so innocent, almost nostalgic, right? And of course, it's visually striking, a perfect hint of what was on the way. All right, this brings us to the absolute core of their whole project. See, Jack and Meg didn't just accidentally become minimalists. No, they deliberately built this, like, a fortress of rules around everything they did. The whole idea was that if you take away most of the choices, you actually force yourself to be more creative. And their inspiration for this wasn't just pulled out of thin air, it was super specific. Jock was a huge fan of this Dutch art movement called the style, which literally means the style. These artists, guys like Gerrit Rietveld, had this core belief that you could get to a kind of universal beauty by just boiling everything down to its essentials. Primary colors, simple shapes. Sound familiar? So they took that whole style idea and basically made their own version, the White Stripes' rule of three. First up, the colors. You only saw them in red, white, and black. Period. Their clothes, their gear, their album art, everything. Second, the sound. Only three core elements were allowed: guitar, drums, and vocals. That's it. No bass, no keyboards, nothing else. And third, there was this belief in the power of the number three itself. Think about it. Things in threes just feel more complete, more memorable. It made everything they did feel so deliberate and powerful. Okay, so they've got their rules for how they look and what instruments they can play, but how did they actually make the music sound so huge? Well, they took that same philosophy right into the recording studio. They started embracing all this old school tech that pretty much the entire music industry had thrown in the trash. I mean, look at this comparison. It really shows you just how radical they were being. While the whole world was obsessed with digital perfection, the White Stripes were complete fanatics for analog. Get this. For their masterpiece, the album Elephant, they went to a studio in London where there was a strict rule. No piece of equipment could be newer than 1963. No computers, just old-school tape machines. It was a total middle finger to the modern way of doing things. And this was the gear that made all that glorious noise. That main guitar, the 1964 Airline. It wasn't some fancy, expensive, vintage collector's item. It was a cheap, plastic, department store guitar that was actually really hard to play. But the real secret weapon? It was this little red pedal, the Digitech Whammy. By stomping on it, Jack could drop his guitar's pitch down a whole octave. Suddenly, you've got this thunderous, fake bass sound. And just like that, the whole "we don't have a bass player" problem was solved. And this quote from Jock really gets to the heart of it. This wasn't just about being nostalgic for old stuff. For him, it was all about the struggle. He saw playing music as physical work, as an attack. He literally wanted to be fighting his guitar to wrestle a sound out of it. And that makes so much sense, right? It's that gritty, industrial Detroit mindset coming through. Now, these rules didn't just stop at the music and the visuals, oh no. They applied to their personal story too, and this led to probably their most famous or infamous rule, the fiction they kept up for years, that they were brother and sister. But here's what was actually going on. Jack and Meg, they got married way back in 1996. And here's a detail I love. Jack Gillis became Jack White. He took her last name, which was pretty unconventional. So they formed the band after they were married, then they got divorced in 2000 and just kept the band going. The whole truth didn't spill out until a newspaper got a hold of their marriage and divorce papers in 2001. So why the big charade? Why pretend to be siblings? Well, it was another one of their brilliant constraints. It was a rule for the media. Think about it. If you tell everyone you're brother and sister, nobody's going to ask you about your love life. It immediately forces the conversation back to the music. Plus, it created this amazing sense of mystique, and it fit perfectly with their whole aesthetic of innocence and childhood. So you see, they weren't just lying, they were controlling their own story. It was all part of the art project. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the philosophy, but does it actually work? Can all these limitations really lead to massive success? I mean, can you really build something enormous out of such tiny, simple parts? Well, let's look at the ultimate proof, the case study to end all case studies. A song built on just 7 notes that literally conquered the entire planet. You know the one I'm talking about, 7 Nation Army. And of course, in true White Stripes fashion, even the title has this perfectly simple, childlike origin story. Turns out, 7 Nation Army was just what Jack used to call the Salvation Army when he was a little kid. He misheard it, and that's the name that stuck in his head. And the journey this simple riff went on is just unbelievable. So Jack comes up with the riff during a sound check, of all places, in Melbourne, Australia. Then, a couple of years later, completely randomly, soccer fans in Belgium start chanting it in the stands. And from there, it just spread like wildfire. The Italian fans picked it up when they won the World Cup in 2006, and that was it. It became the global sports anthem, a chant for victory, for unity, all over the world. And what did Jack think about all this? Was he mad that people took his song? Not at all. He absolutely loved it. He saw it as his simple little melody being embraced by the people, becoming a genuine modern folk song. And really, what could be a better validation of their entire philosophy? A simple melody, born from a strict set of rules, had escaped the band and become part of the actual global culture. And when you boil it all down, that's really the legacy of the White Stripes. They were living, breathing, screaming proof of the incredible power of creative limits. By saying no to almost every choice available, they somehow ended up creating something that felt absolutely limitless. So, in the end, their whole story kind of leaves us with a pretty interesting question, doesn't it? We live in a world that gives us infinite options, endless choices for everything. But what could you achieve if you stripped it all back? What amazing thing might you create if you decided to give yourself fewer choices, not more?